of the week, someone in public life is dealing with a crisis. It may be political, it may be legal, it may involve the reputation of a product or firm. Dealing with crisis effectively and in real time is a high art. Joining us now, attorneys Adam Goldberg and Josh Galper. They are co-founders of the firm Trident DMG, and they are co-hosts of a new podcast called The Crisis, available on SoundCloud. Good to have both of you here.
Thanks, great to be here.
Give us a flavor for what your new endeavor, your new podcast will focus on in terms of how one deals with crisis effectively and in real time. Adam?
Okay. Well, you know, we've been doing this for about 20 years, and the more we talk to people, this work of crisis management, and the more we talk to people, the more they want to know how you do it, what goes into it, what's the best things to do when you're facing a crisis. So we decided that we're going to ask journalists, I'm sure we're going to ask you to join us one time, to come on and dissect different crises. Last week we did our first podcast, and it was about Trump and the week he had had, and it looks like we could probably do one every week on Trump if we wanted to.
Sometimes, as a professional, the worse the crisis, the more likely folks are to call people like you. But if the problem were so easy that it solved itself, they wouldn't be on the phone. Therefore, you've got to come up with something, and fast, to help damage from done to a person's political career, their legal status, or their product or their firm.
That is really right. And I think, Bruce, the way to look at crisis management is that at heart, it is a human interest story. It may combine elements of politics or business or reputation or very complicated business or regulatory issues, but at the end of the day, there are human decision makers who have either made the right decision and gotten in trouble for it, or the wrong decision and gotten in trouble for it, and they're calling you to help them get out of that situation.
There's no magic wand that can end a crisis on a, on a dime, in a nanosecond. But there are successful strategies. Adam, what are some of the hallmarks of successful strategies?
Generally, I think you're familiar with this. We boil down our strategies to tell it all, tell it early, tell it yourself. The most important thing is you need to define yourself and what's happened and what you're doing to ameliorate it before others define you.
How would you, if you were in the Trump camp, and I think there's little concern of that happening, but if you were, for whatever, you're having to explain Donald Trump publicly to a waiting world. What sorts of things do you offer by way of explanation or defense?
I think the first thing, if I were Trump, is don't deny the obvious. So he went on a rant yesterday about the following over his tweets of the Jewish Star of David, and Hillary Clinton and the corrupt Hillary, and he denied that in calling it a sheriff star, calling it a plain star. He's just denying the obvious, that this was taken from a white supremacist website, and Star of David is a sign of anti-Semitism when used in that fashion. And instead, he got himself in trouble yesterday in an otherwise probably good stump speech yesterday, where he's just denying it, and he's making it last longer when he needs to let it behind him and acknowledge what happened.
Is there something, Josh, to the old saw, if you're in a hole, stop digging? And are you mystified that Donald Trump seems to double down on whatever the situation is, seemingly no matter what the contretemps?
I am mystified by that, and I think Adam is exactly right that what he's advised is the way to get it behind him. The other thing he has to focus on is the positive track. Show the country what he has to offer in terms of a vision and plans and specifics. That would also be helpful to him to get beyond this. But I think part of what he's thinking, perhaps, is that in the primaries, this kind of strategy worked. He's now in a very different environment of the general election, and he's got to reach out to people who are genuinely undecided independents, people who are not in the Republican camp, or Republican inclined in the beginning, and he's got to persuade them. He's got to show something positive to offer, and that would also help him to get past these problems.
I don't know if you heard James Comey lay out in detail the other day the process the FBI went through, and then how they got to the conclusion that he reached not to recommend to the Justice Department charges against Hillary Clinton flowing from her time as Secretary of State, her use of a personal email server. The facts he laid out and the statements she's made, her assertions, does the considerable daylight between those sets of statements, is that a crisis, just the existence of what he maintained and what she has maintained? Is that a crisis?
Well, look, the outcome is the fact that this is now over. And it is time for really everybody to move on, because right now we're in conspiracy theory land in trying to second guess what the director did. Let's remember, over the last year and a half, Republicans have been saying that Director Comey was above politics, that he was going to follow the facts. He and the career FBI agents and career prosecutors would follow the facts to a conclusion. Their conclusion was that there was not enough for a reasonable prosecutor to seize on to move forward with an indictment. And that's what happened.
This sounds like very skilled advocacy. but here's the thing, Adam. They said she maintained it was a small number of emails. They were personal. They were not classified or top secret. I mean, I'm generalizing here, but in the interest of time, I think that what I just said is fair.
Right.
He said it was a huge number. It wasn't just personal, and some of it that no reasonable person should have been handling email that way. First question, before we get to how do you respond and how do you crisis manage this, is this a crisis? Given his credibility and his statements and her statements, is there so much daylight in between that you would say that this is a crisis?
I don't think it's a crisis simply because, as Josh said, he ended up saying that she complied with the law, she didn't violate the law. But it's still going to be very difficult for her. It's ripe for opposition ads and campaign tactics. So Comey did give a lot of fodder for her that's going to make this issue persist longer, but I don't think it's in a crisis area. It's more in this typical opposition research land of campaigns going back and forth.
One of the fundamental decisions I assume you have to make in any crisis situation is, do you come out and talk in detail about whatever it is, or do you hunker down, say that you're focusing on things that are way more important and just try to bull your way forward? Which of those is this?
Well, I think it's funny. I think she said she's made a mistake, and I think if you asked her advisors, you would say she also made a mistake in how she handled this going back a year ago. So clearly she should have come out with this. There's a lot more information she could have given more sharply, and her explanations have evolved. So they went from saying there was no classified information to there were no emails where classified information was marked as classified. And I still think that still holds true for the most part with what Comey said yesterday. But yeah, she could have done a much better job earlier on in handling this. But let's not take away from the substance of where this ended up.
And in some ways, this follows the classic pattern of bad situations where you do something wrong and then compound it with statements that are factually inaccurate. Now you've got both tracks to try to deal with.
Yeah, and that is one of the most difficult things to handle when you're in a crisis. I mean, let's take the example data breaches. They're things that hit us every single day. Companies are dealing with them. Governments are dealing with them every day. The problem in that kind of situation, for instance, is that it's hard to get the handle around the facts. What information was exposed? What systems were compromised? Who was actually affected? And what was the nature of it and the width of the exposure? Very hard to get your arms around that in a very short period of time.
Speaking of short period of time, I only have 45 seconds left. Often the political or the PR strategy clashes with the legal, right? Because you don't want to put yourself in legal jeopardy, but you do want to seem like you're forthcoming and honest. And that's tough, right? When those two...
Yes, that's right. It's funny. It's frequently, when we have conflicts and we're representing a client, it's with our client's other lawyers. When we're urging our clients to get out there and say something, unless somebody's under a white-collar criminal investigation where their liberty is at stake, really there's nothing in the law that prevents or should prevent anybody from going out there and stating their case.
And we haven't had a chance. Next time we'll talk about products. Like if you're the person representing the exploding airbag company, there is no easy path out of that. You try to mitigate the damage best you can, but these are really tough cases too.
Absolutely, no, they are. For sure, Bruce.
We'll have both of you back. I'm sorry, we're up on the clock. Attorneys Adam Goldberg and Josh Galper, co-founders of